During the third week of October, intense fights broke out near it.The and Ivanhrad. Because of the shape of these settlements, the Russians conducted their assaults from the south to avoid crossfire as much as possible. But the Ukrainians had been fortifying this vulnerable part of the town for a long time, so it took weeks to establish control over the trenches in front of the settlements or move from one building to another. Russian sources have also noted that the Ukrainians used their artillery pretty heavily here and, judging by the limited success, also pretty effectively. Despite speculations of a Ukrainian retreat, even the Wagner group had stated that this is not true. After fighting for 10 days straight near it.The, on October 21, the Russians claimed that they had finally reached it.The itself. Their progress in Ivanhrad was reportedly more significant because they were fighting inside the settlement itself. Despite such a mild progress, the Russians started claiming that they were about to advance towards the center of Bakhmut along the river, meet with the forces on the eastern outskirts and cut off half of the town. Unfortunately for the Russians, the Ukrainians have been preparing several counterattacks. They have reinforced the Bakhmut group and, on October 20, conducted a counterattack in Ivanhrad. As a result, the Russians lost the positions that they had been fighting for over the previous 10 days. The second counterattack was launched in the direction of Pokrovsk. This counterattack had a much larger scale, and as a result, the Ukrainians completely pushed the Russians out of the factories located on the outskirts. But the Ukrainians did not stop here and also pushed the Russians from their newly established positions along the ravines that stretch towards Klinov. Right now, the Ukrainians are controlling 100% of Bakhmut, and despite the constant alarm, Bakhmut is not yet in danger. Even by taking the whole southern part, it will be very difficult to take Bakhmut. The Russians could do it by establishing control over the area to the north of Bakhmut, and they increased the intensity of their attacks here right now, but this is not the first time they tried to do it. The northern part is closed for the Russians unless they take Soledar, and here, the Russians have been stuck in the same place for more than 2 months. If you are against the invasion of Ukraine and want to support the work that I am doing, consider making a purchase in the online store UA Supporter. Here you can find a lot of products with Ukrainian symbols, to not only show your support for this channel, but also for Ukraine. In this video, I will focus on the Eastern Front and, in particular, on the battle for Bakhmut. The very first attack on Bakhmut was launched from the northeast. The objective of the attack group was to establish control over the 4 factories located on the outskirts of the town. They got stuck, and the only way they could move further was if the second group attacked the Ukrainians from the south and undermined their defense, allowing the Russians to split Bakhmut in half. And that is why the Russians focused their efforts on moving toward the southern part of Bakhmut as fast as possible. During the second week of October, the Russians managed to undermine the Ukrainian defense in Vesela Dolina, which caused a collapse of the Ukrainian defense in Zaitsev. By the end of the second week of October, the Russians moved towards Ivanhrad. Simultaneously, after consolidating control over Kodyma, the Russians increased the intensity of attacks on Mykolaievka and Mykolaievka Drua tremendously. By controlling the hills between Kodyma and these 2 villages, the Russians could see every move of the Ukrainians. Since these hills are only 1 kilometer away from these 2 villages, the Ukrainians gradually retreated towards Kurdyamivka. The weakening of the Ukrainian defense allowed the Russians to expand their offensive operation and also attack Odradivka. By the end of the second week of October, the Russians established control over these settlements and managed to get to the other side of the river. This allowed the Russians to simplify their logistics and, with ease, start to assault Kurdyamivka from the east and Ukrainian positions in front of Andrivka and even Klishivka.